Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Let us continue our discussions with language learning. Once again, I will repeat, for the purpose of learning language as a child, the term learning and acquisition can be used interchangeably. So, we can say learning language or acquiring language. They mean the same thing for this purpose. So, what have we done so far? We have looked at language, and then we have been trying to understand how learning works. Out of several things that we have discussed about language, there are three key things which we should keep in mind. First, language is a unique human capacity. It's unique because language is the only thing which makes human distinct from many other species. Language is really a sophisticated product of human mind. What do we mean by sophisticated product? We mean that it's a rule-governed system. It's really a rule-governed system. There are several underlying rules that operate in language. We will be coming to those rules, and those rules will help us understand a lot about connection between language and human mind. Language, being rule-governed system, is what helps us also understand functioning of human mind. We will, through the developments in the study of language, which is linguistics basically, we are looking at this structure of language, we are looking at the underlying rules of language to understand how human mind really works. So, we will be looking at these two things back and forth. What we also saw so far, that language or learning of language is really different from all other kinds of learning, such as singing, swimming, dancing, flying, cycling, etc. Particularly because we need to be grown up for other kinds of learning, whereas it works exactly the opposite. We do not perform too well if we are grown up for the purpose of language learning. Therefore, it's easy for us to say the two following things. Language is a special purpose cognition, and language learning is really a child's play. This is what we have seen so far. We started looking at the process involved in language learning as well yesterday. We will revise it a bit before we move further. We said a normal human child already has the capacity at the time of birth to acquire language. However, what is critical for the child is the immediate surrounding. So, the input comes from immediate surrounding, and input interacts with already inbuilt capacity, and this inbuilt capacity has two parts. This inbuilt capacity is called language acquisition device, which has universal grammar inbuilt in it. Now, So, around human mind, language acquisition device and universal grammar, we need input, and what we get is output as part of learning. This is the process involved in language learning. We will be looking at in details what you see in the circle, human mind. That is, what is it that happens inside this? What is it that happens in the process of very limited, very small and very fuzzy input, and these things get processed and we get grammatically and finite output at the age of 4. So, the key puzzle here is something happens inside human mind. The way human mind processes input that it receives is really critical for us to uncover in order to understand how it works, how learning of language works, how human mind works, and also it helps us understand more about language. So, we will be looking at those things, and in fact this is what we intend to do throughout the course. Let us look at a little bit more with this, with what happens in human mind. So, here is what we do with that. So, language acquisition device and language acquisition device is a complex system, and it helps language acquisition device miraculously develops generative capacity. The input that we receive is processed with generative capacity that human mind is already enabled for. This generative capacity is responsible for learning language. This generative capacity is responsible for uncovering underlying rules of language. It's critical, it's important for us to keep in mind that this process is fast, very fast. This happens in no time. We will spend considerable amount of time in understanding this fast speed. We will be looking at the examples and stages in the process of language learning next time. It's effortless. It's fast because it happens before 4 years of age. 4 years of age is absolutely no time, and a child has already uncovered the rules of language that is operating in the language that the child speaks. It's effortless because nobody has given tuition to the child, not even input is given in the form of help for language learning, and basically that means it requires no instruction. What it does is human mind recognizes patterns, develop rules, and generates a perfect system called language. This is why we call language a rule governed system, a perfect system, a sophisticated product of human mind. With all that, what we get as result is a huge body of knowledge, and this knowledge is called knowledge of language. Let me give you an example of it. If a child says John likes pizza, the child knows the difference between like and likes. What operates between the distinction, what creates the distinction between the two sentences is pretty obvious to the child. Ram, Ram khana khata hai. In this Hindi sentence, Ram as a noun and its properties are clear to a child. It gets manifested on agreement patterns of the sentence. Khana khata hai is the predicate of the sentence, and that has masculine gender, singular number, and third person reflection on it. Now, these are the things that automatically come when a child develops this capacity called language. But what happens is, this is an underlying tacit knowledge, and this becomes part of what we call knowledge of language. To take another example, rather little simpler, is the following. If we speak a language, let's say Hindi or Tamil or Telugu, English, we have the capacity of this language in the following sense. We know all the words of that language. It sounds a little bit too much to claim. However, if you look at the following, it will make more sense. Suppose I speak Hindi. If I am given a word and I am asked to make a decision whether the word belongs to Hindi or not, it takes me absolutely no time in making the decision whether the word belongs to Hindi or not. It does not mean that I remember all the words of Hindi. If I am given a notebook to write all the words of Hindi, probably I will not be able to do so. I won't be able to write more than 100 or 200 words at a time. Maybe 200 is also too big a number. However, I am given a word to make a judgment about it, whether the word belongs to my language or not. I take almost no time. Now, what is going on? And my judgment is almost accurate, is fully accurate rather. So here is what comes out of this mathematics. Actually, I am scanning the word through the lexicon of the language that is inbuilt in my mind, and I find that this word does not belong to the language that I speak. This judgment comes out of my knowledge of language, and this knowledge, whether a word belongs to my language or not, is really a tacit knowledge, and this becomes part of what we say knowledge of language. We can go on and look for more examples. Take one more to conclude this part of knowledge of language. We will look at it a little bit more little later, but let's take one more example. Gender plays a very crucial role in agreement in a language like Hindi. Therefore, it is called grammatical gender. What we mean by grammatical gender is following. The gender of a noun shows up on the verb in every sentence. Ram khana khata hai, Sita khana khati hai. The gender of Ram and Sita in these two sentences show up on the verb predicate khana khata hai. In the case of the sentence 1, Ram khana khata hai, Ram's masculine gender shows up on the predicate in khana khata hai, whereas feminine gender of Sita, in second sentence Sita khana khati hai shows up on the predicate as well. This is the question of natural gender. However, all the nouns must have a gender assigned in Hindi. For example, kitab has feminine gender on it, kursi has a feminine gender on it, kamara has a masculine gender on it. Now, this is part of our tacit knowledge, that the Hindi speaker knows the gender of a noun very well. There is absolutely no hesitation, and very widely, most of the time, this happens to be true, of course with little bit variation. We will look at the variation part some other time. So most of the people will come up with this decision that the gender of kitab is feminine, the gender of kursi is also feminine, the gender of kamara is masculine. We will hardly have a disagreement on this. Now, how do we know the gender of kamara as masculine? This is part of knowledge of language. The shared knowledge across the speakers of the language is part of knowledge of language. So, hopefully these three examples will make it clear, will make knowledge of language clear. Let's look at universal grammar for a moment. We have used this term yesterday, we are using this term again. We will continue using the term because it requires clarity in our understanding. Universal grammar consists of a set of innate and abstract linguistic principles. These principles govern what is possible in language that an individual speaks. In short, what is possible in language is governed by principles, and parameters govern how languages vary from one another. In other words, parameters are set of properties of a language that vary in certain restricted ways. What is this supposed to give us? Let's look at examples. All languages will have sentences. This is part of principle. All sentences will have a subject and a predicate. This is part of principle. All languages will have nouns. This is part of principle. Whereas arrangement of words in a sentence will vary from language to language. For some language, for example, verbs occur in the middle of a sentence. For a language like English, verbs occur in the middle of a sentence. For example, John likes pizza. The verb like is in the middle of a sentence, which means John is the subject, verb like, and pizza object. Verb precedes the object, whereas in a language like Hindi, we'll take sentences that we have used before. Ram khana khata hai, the verb khata hai is the final constituent of the sentence. So, Hindi could be a verb final language and English is a verb medial language. Now, Hindi is verb final and English is verb medial is dependent on the arrangement of words in Hindi, arrangement of words in these two languages, whereas both the languages will definitely need predicate, both the languages will definitely need sentence with subjects, and both the languages will definitely will have sentences. are part of principles. We'll elaborate this thing little later as well. We have looked at what we have just looked at, knowledge of language, and to once again give you a comprehensive summary of it, this is a set of underlying rules that, and the good part is that it's a particular kind of knowledge that we have. We know, this is about knowing, and we try to understand know in a particular way here. We know the rules, but we don't know that we know them. This is specific about knowledge of language. Now, to give it a little bit more comprehensive summary of of how language learning works is the following. The generative apparatus that we have just discussed helps us uncover the rules of language and come up with well-formed, rule-governed sentences. This is called linguistic computation. This computation works in human mind. And what we said about input little earlier and last time, that input has to come from immediate society, immediate environment of the learner, in this case children, has to be socio-culturally grounded. And input from such kind of input helps us learn language. And on the basis of that, the body of knowledge that develops is not really because of stimulus response. We have discussed this part a little bit. We'll underline this thing again. Input is not proportionate to output in the process of learning. Input is not proportionate to output. Input is way smaller and output is much bigger. Therefore, we have said the input is restrictive in nature, input is limited, and output is enormous, infinite. Now, the theory which believes in stimulus response will predict something completely different. For that, if input, that basically such a theory predicts that input and output are proportionate. That is, output is going to be proportionate to input, which is not the case in language learning. A little bit of observation will reveal this fact with clarity. So, to summarize again for today what we have done, we are looking at language learning, and we want to conclude with the following for today. We have used several terms such as knowledge of language, universal grammar, language acquisition device, generative apparatus. These are the critical terms for us to remember. Language is a rule-governed system. We need to understand this. Learning of language takes place with input from immediate society, but the processing of that input with the inbuilt generative capacity of human mind is fundamental for what we speak. This is very critical for our understanding of how language is learned, and therefore we keep on saying so far that learning is really a child's play. This type of learning takes place without us realizing what's happening in human mind. Therefore, we call it effortless. Therefore, we call it automatic. Thank you.